everybody. Thank you for tuning into the second part of our pandemic reaction series. If you haven't seen my previous videos, my name is Emma. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I will be guiding us through the series on pandemic reactions. Today, we're going to talk about loneliness and isolation in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm going to talk about why it happened, what changes it caused, and what coping skills are useful to target this experience. Although I will talk about loneliness and isolation in the context of COVID-19, the coping skills that I'm going to talk about will be useful long-term changes in habits to use for everyday experiences of loneliness and isolation, even outside of the pandemic. So I suggest that, you feel free to use these in your everyday life as well. All right, let's get into it. As most of us know, COVID-19 really began to impact our lives in March of 2020, when things like lockdown, stay-at-home orders, remote work in school, and social distancing became worldwide. These concepts were foreign to all of us at that point and definitely took some adjustment. Staying at home daily, and maybe with only a few other members of your household, maybe totally alone, definitely led to an increase of loneliness and isolation for many of us, especially since we didn't know when this new way of life would end. At some point in the beginning, we thought it would only last 2 weeks. Then we thought, okay, maybe 2 months. And obviously it got longer and longer. Naturally, when we experience something new, we react in different ways and experience lots of feelings, literally and physically. So loneliness and isolation can spread to every crack in our lives and can reflect in our physical, emotional, cognitive, and behavioral experiences. So let's get into the specifics of that. So physically, loneliness and isolation can cause physical experiences of exhaustion or restlessness, tension, lack of appetite, but also increase in appetite, and body aches. Cognitively, in our thoughts, loneliness and isolation can cause intrusive thoughts, self-criticism, overthinking, and just general negativity. Behaviorally, loneliness and isolation can lead us to behaviors like staying in bed, isolating further into ourselves, again, eating more or less, and generally withdrawing from people. It can also cause the opposite behaviors, including acting extra clingy, overreaching to people, and placing our needs on others. And then lastly, loneliness and isolation can cause emotions including sadness, frustration, hopelessness at the idea of seeing others, and a general feeling of disconnect from others. As you can probably see from what I just listed, these reactions can often play off of one another, and we usually can experience a lot of these physical, emotional, behavioral, and cognitive things all at once. What can we do about it? Now I will talk about specific coping skills and self-care that can decrease negative impacts of loneliness and isolation. Like I mentioned in the beginning of this, coping skills are a useful tool to reduce long-term negative impacts of something traumatic like this pandemic. They are positive strategies for managing negative reactions to challenging situations and can be used even outside of this pandemic, like I said. So self-care is something that includes routines and habits that can help to increase positive emotions and feelings about yourself and are a type of coping skill. So some specific coping skills to target loneliness and isolation include things like seeking emotional and psychological closeness when you can't have physical closeness. You could do this by calling a friend, setting up a Zoom event, connecting on social media. You can also do things to tune outside of yourself, like listening to a podcast or your favorite music. You can read a book. Find online communities to connect over shared hobbies. We definitely have had to find ways to get creative in how we connect with people virtually, and these creative approaches will last far beyond the pandemic. Here we are on YouTube, me talking to you about something that maybe I would have just presented in person before. So we definitely have come up with new ways to connect and share information with one another. Some more coping skills to help with dealing with feelings of sadness and frustration caused by loneliness and isolation can include doing things like taking a deep breath and counting to 10, using positive self-talk, journaling your feelings, and practicing self-care. So some specific self-care ideas to reduce loneliness and isolation include doing something calming like yoga or taking a walk, making a gratitude list, or spending time with a pet. I find that spending time with pets makes me much less lonely, even if I'm surrounded by people. They're the best.
Hey everyone, it sounds like you're talking about self-care, which is something I happen to talk a little bit about in my YouTube series. Coping responses of self-care absolutely are in the same bucket, and I'd love to give you some tips, hints, tricks, tools for dealing with all of that as we respond to the pandemic's ever unfolding times in our lives. So yeah, hop on over to my self-care series and we can talk all about it.
So I would also like to point out that something important to remember in situations when feelings of loneliness and isolation occur is that everybody feels this at some point or another, and especially during the pandemic. So acknowledging your feelings as normal and disrupting them by using these coping skills and self-care ideas is a great way to combat this experience. And like I said, these tips can extend beyond just the pandemic. So I hope that this video has shown you that any feelings of loneliness and isolation that you might have felt or still feeling during different lockdown phases of the pandemic are normal and natural, and that there are useful tools out there to combat this experience. So next week, we will talk about the feelings of anxiety and mood changes that we might have experienced during the pandemic and how to combat them. In the meantime, if you want to leave a comment with a question or idea on this video or on any of Mental Health Partners' social media profiles, a team member will be hosting a live stream at the end of the month to answer or engage with your comments. And you can find links to our social media profiles in the description of this video. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.